In 1999 in the state of Pennsylvania, United States, on a Thursday night, Gary Michael Heidnik died by lethal injection, a man whose house and crime scene was called the House of Horrors. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the baby sower, an individual so sick that he went down in the history of an entire country for having a harem of women or a group of women, where with this his intention was to have the perfect baby with perfect physical characteristics. Born on November 22, 1943 in Ohio, Heidnik was the son of Michael and Ellen, a couple with many problems due to Ellen's alcoholism, so much so that when Gary was still a child, they divorced. So he and his brother Terry spent much of their childhood at their father's house, who remarried shortly after. They always hated their stepmother, and their father never took their side when it came to the conflicts that arose. One of the punishments his father inflicted on little Gary was that every time he wet the bed, he would hang the sheets in the window of his room to humiliate him in front of the whole neighborhood. Even one of the rumors that is told is that his father would grab him by the ankles and hold him upside down out the window. When he was still a child, he fell from a tree, fracturing his skull and causing a lifelong injury. This is believed to have contributed to his erratic behavior in his adult life. As has happened to several serial killers like Richard Ramirez, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Fred West, it is believed that this has a very close relationship to the way they behave and the violent backgrounds of the individuals. Gary suffered verbal abuse from his schoolmate, as they used to call him Balloon Head. So in 1961, when he was 18 years old, he dropped out of high school and decided to enlist in the United States Navy. Once he was accepted, he was stationed in West Germany in the summer of 1962, but was immediately discharged just a year later, because he was diagnosed with a schizophrenic personality disorder. In 1964, he began taking nursing classes in Philadelphia, and a year later he finished his studies. By 1967, he managed to buy a 3-story house and began frequenting an institute called Elwyn that specialized in the care of individuals with different mental abilities. Now here is where Heidnik's life took a turn for the worse, as it seemed that everything was predestined to return to a very difficult life, just like when he was a child. Heidnik tried to take his own life on more than 13 occasions after his mother did manage to do so in 1970. His mother had decided to take her own life with an overdose of medication and alcohol. All of this happened when he was 27 years old. The truth is that these suicidal tendencies were something that ran in the family, as several of his relatives had done it. In October of '71, Heidnik decided to create his own church on North Marshall Street, this in Philadelphia, which he called the United Church of the Ministers of God. What happened with this was that he made a lot of money after this, because by 1975, he already had more than $500,000 for the church, due to a $1,500 investment he had made at the beginning. One of the first encounters with the law was in '76. Heidnik was found guilty of aggravated assault and illegal possession of a gun after shooting a person, and by '78, he was imprisoned for the first time on this occasion for kidnapping a woman who was in a mental rehabilitation institution. He kept her locked in the basement of his house, and after she was found, it was known that she had been sodomized multiple times. Gary was arrested and convicted with kidnapping, abuse, and unlawful restraint and others, and sentenced to 3 to 7 years in jail. But at trial, and in November of '78, he was found guilty and sentenced to 3 to 7 years in jail. But the original sentence was annulled, so he only served the minimum, which were 3 years. And another thing I didn't mention is that he didn't even spend them in prison, but in a medical clinic for people with mental problems. After Gary was doing well economically in the mid-80s, he met his wife through a marriage agency. The name of this woman was Betty Disto, a girl of Filipino origin who had come to the United States in September of '85, and in that same year, Gary and Betty got married in Maryland. Unfortunately, the love didn't last long, as she had the misfortune of finding her husband with 3 women in bed. The truth is that Heidnik was a selfish individual who only looked out for his own well-being and took great satisfaction in hurting Betty, damaging her feelings, both physically and psychologically, as there is evidence that he even abused her. The problem with this was that Betty became pregnant before she could get out of that toxic and disastrous relationship. The son from this relationship is named Jesse John Disto, and if it weren't for Betty suing him once they were divorcing, Gary would never have realized he had a son. The terrible thing is that this wouldn't be Heidnik's only child. He would later have another with Gail Lincoln named Gary Jr. He was taken to a home for unwanted babies. From here on out, his life only went downhill, and his behavior degenerated. In early November of '86, Heidnik abducted 6 women and kept them locked in the basement of his house in Philadelphia. What I'm going to tell you from now on may be hard to imagine, in addition to being very inhumane. I'm not going to go into much detail, and I'm not going to tell you everything this character did, but I will tell you some of the most important parts. Heidnik, in his desire to possess women to have a harem or slaves, began his thread of abductions and abuses in the year '86. This is why he was later given the name of the baby-seater. One of his plans was to devise a farm of perfect babies. He had the crazy idea that he could create the, as I tell you, ideal baby. On November 25, he kidnapped Josefina Rivera, a woman of the gallant life. After finishing the casual encounter, he strangled her until she was unconscious before chaining her to the basement. Shortly after, he dug a hole in the basement floor and put the woman in it. Then he covered it with a piece of wood, in case she tried to escape, or if she misbehaved, as he referred to this behavior. On December 3rd, '86, he now abducted a woman suffering from mental faculties named Sandra Lindsay. She had previously lost a baby while locked up with Gary, which only made him angry, and you can imagine the mistreatment and humiliations, and apart from the abuses he would have carried out with these women. Imagine being locked up, chained and half-naked in a dirty basement of an individual who only feeds you occasionally and when he feels like it, or when he remembers. But Heidnik was not satisfied with this, so on December 23, he brought a new woman to his house, Lisa Thomas, 19 years old. She was a cheerful girl with a lot of future in school. And just a week later, Gary brought another woman, now this girl named Deborah Dudley, and she was one of the only ones who tried to defend herself from Heidnik's abuses. So she spent more time in the well that I previously mentioned that had ended. By the way, he put the girls into this well, covered them. This well had water. He put some wires in, and well, the girls got burned. The truth is that telling you about these kinds of things is not easy, as it is impossible to try to imagine the atrocities of an act in this way. It's truly impressive the evil exercised by such a deranged man. After Dudley's abduction, he began to humiliate them in horrible ways because of the anger he had. The beast Heidnik forced them to have intimate relations with each other, and at other times he fed them dog food. I think even calling him an animal is an understatement. Animals don't have such a macabre conscience to do something of this magnitude. On January 18, he again deprived a woman of her freedom. Her name was Jacqueline Askins. And on one occasion when he got angry with Sandra Lindsay, he hung her from the wrist to a pipe in the ceiling and kept her like that for 2 days. She developed a very high fever and would die the next morning. Then he took her down from the pipe, took the body to the upstairs room, cut it into pieces, and dissolved it. It should be noted that by this time, more than 2 months had passed since he abducted the first woman. Can you imagine being in a place like this for 2 months? The truth is, it must have been something horrible, a nightmare. But without any hope, without seeing the sun, surrounded by darkness and misery, animals like cockroaches crawling all over the body. I tell you, this must have been a nightmare, crying every night out of fear and what they thought was going to happen, or the uncertain future that awaited them. In that circumstance, losing one's life no longer sounded like a bad idea. And the worst or most sickening part of all this is that after dissolving Askin's body, he cooked it and fed it to his captives. A couple of days later, his neighbors alerted the police that a nauseating smell was coming from Heidnik's house, so they started an investigation, but he managed to get away by saying it was an accident, that he had burned the food, that they didn't have to worry. And one of the first women then kidnapped, Josefina Rivera, began to devise a plan to escape and free the others. She told Gary that the other girls were devising a plan to escape and that they were going to attack him. And unfortunately, the downside of this plan is that the women had to pay a price to be able to gain their freedom. Heidnik believed Rivera and what he did was grotesque. He gagged them all and stuck a screwdriver in their ears to make them deaf. There were many things that happened during this time, and throughout the nightmare these women lived, things too graphic to even be able to tell you in this video. But after gaining the trust of Gary Rivera, she convinced him to let her go for a while to see her family. Surprisingly, Heidnik agreed and released her. So he took her to a gas station and waited for her at this place. She acted normal, but after turning the corner, she managed to call 911. When the police responded, they immediately arrived at this gas station and managed to arrest Gary. They arrived at Heidnik's house of horrors and encountered a horrifying scene. 3 women chained in the basement and 2 bodies, one in the fridge and another buried right there. Once he was locked up and tried, he attempted to take his own life and leave this world in the most cowardly way possible after causing so much pain. But fortunately, he did not succeed. The sentence was for 2 counts of first-degree murder, in addition to the sentences for kidnapping and deprivation of liberty. The state did not think twice, so he was sentenced to lethal injection, and thus, the House of Horrors and the Baby Sower met his end. He was executed on July 6, 1999, and his body was incinerated afterwards. Although he is not considered a serial killer according to the FBI, as they classify them from 2 or more victims over a prolonged rest period, the truth is that this man's mind is totally inhuman, and in a way makes you rethink capital punishment as a good way to dispense justice, even though I do not agree with this. And as a curious fact, Gary was the last man to be executed in the state of Pennsylvania. If you like this mystery, don't forget to follow me on Facebook, on Instagram. Now, you can also listen to the audios on Spotify and on all social networks, and see you in the next mystery. Thank you.